I took away my husband's access to our money after he helped his brother without letting me know first. Imagine checking your bank account and thousands are missing, not because of fraud, but because your own husband gave it to his brother without telling you. That's when I did something no one expected. I shut down everything. Money, cards, access, gone. You want to know why? Oh, it gets deeper. Hey, store lover. Welcome to the Narrative Hub, Reddit Stories. Believe me, this adventure gets wild, but it's only epic with you. Seriously, you make this possible. Want more stories? Greater adventure? Smash subscribe right now. Smash like. Comment below. Let's go. But before I tell you exactly what I discovered and why my response was so extreme, let me paint you the picture of how this all started. Because what you're about to hear isn't just about money, it's about loyalty, lies, and a family secret that goes back years. It was a Tuesday morning in March. I remember because I was rushing to get ready for my presentation at work, the one I'd been preparing for weeks. My coffee was getting cold as I quickly logged into our bank app to check our balance before a planned grocery run later that day. That's when I saw it. A wire transfer. $12,500. Gone. Just gone. My heart started pounding. My first thought? We've been hacked. Identity theft. Fraud. I immediately started scrolling through the transaction details, my hands literally shaking as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. But then I saw the recipient name, Michael Malone. My brother-in-law. The coffee cup slipped from my hands and shattered on the kitchen floor, but I barely noticed. Because in that moment, everything clicked. The hushed phone calls my husband David had been taking late at night. The way he'd been acting distracted and guilty for the past week. The strange look he gave me when I mentioned our savings goals for the house renovation. He didn't just know about this transfer. He authorized it. But here's what made my blood run cold, and this is where the story gets really twisted. That $12,500 wasn't just our money. It was money I had been secretly saving for something that would change both our lives forever. Something David had no idea about. Now, I need you to understand something about our relationship. David and I had been married for 6 years, and we'd always been completely transparent about money. Joint accounts, shared financial goals, total honesty about every purchase over $100. It was our thing. Our foundation of trust. But for the past 8 months, I had been doing something I'd never done before. I had been secretly squirreling away money from my freelance work, money David didn't know about, into a separate account. Why? Because I was planning the surprise of a lifetime. David had been talking for years about wanting to start his own carpentry business. He'd lost his corporate job during the pandemic and had been working for a construction company ever since, but I could see his soul was dying a little more each day. He'd come home exhausted, complaining about his boss, dreaming out loud about the projects he'd love to take on if he had his own shop. I had saved $15,000. $15,000 that I was planning to surprise him with on our anniversary next month, along with a business plan I'd been secretly working on and connections I'd been quietly making in the local contractor community. The $12,500 he'd just given to his brother? That was supposed to be the down payment on his dreams. But wait. It gets worse. See, Michael, David's older brother, has always been the golden child in their family. Successful lawyer, big house, perfect wife, 2 kids in private school. The kind of guy who'd never needed help from anyone, let alone his younger, less successful brother. So when David told me later that morning that Michael was in temporary financial trouble and needed a loan, my first instinct was disbelief. What kind of trouble could Mr. Perfect possibly be in? I was about to find out, and trust me, you're not going to believe this. But before we get to that bombshell, let me tell you about the confrontation that happened when David came home from work that day. Because what he said to me in our kitchen that evening made me realize I didn't know my husband at all. David. I was standing by the kitchen island when he walked in, my laptop open to our bank account. We need to talk. I watched his face carefully. Would he come clean? Would he apologize? Would he at least look guilty? Instead, he looked annoyed. "What's wrong now?" he said, not even glancing at the screen. $12,500, I said slowly. Ring any bells? That's when his face changed. Not to guilt or remorse, but to defiance. "Oh, that," he said, loosening his tie. "Michael needed help. It's just temporary." Just temporary. "You gave away over $12,000 of our money without discussing it with me, and you're acting like it's no big deal?" "It's not a big deal, Danielle. It's family." Family. That word would haunt me for weeks. "I'm your family too, David. I'm your wife. And you went behind my back." "I didn't go behind your back. I made a decision to help my brother. Without telling me. Because I knew you'd react like this." And there it was. The admission that cut deeper than the betrayal itself. He knew I'd object, so he did it anyway and hoped I wouldn't find out. But what he said next made me question everything I thought I knew about our marriage. "Look, Danielle, sometimes a man has to make decisions for his family. Michael is in real trouble, and I wasn't going to let my pride stop me from helping him." "What kind of trouble?" David hesitated. I could see him calculating what to tell me. "Legal trouble. Some complications with a case he was working on." Legal trouble. Complications. Vague non-answers that felt like lies. That's when I made the decision that would change everything. "I want to see the bank records. I want to know exactly what this loan is for. And I want Michael to call me directly to explain." "That's not happening." "Excuse me. Danielle, this is between me and my brother. You don't need to be involved. You don't need to be involved in financial decisions about our joint money." That's when something inside me snapped. I didn't yell. I didn't throw anything. I didn't slam doors. Instead, I went upstairs to our home office, closed the door, and spent the next 2 hours systematically removing David's access to every single financial account we shared. Bank accounts, credit cards, investment accounts, savings. I changed every password, removed his name where I could, and set up alerts so I'd know about every transaction. But that wasn't enough. I also called our bank and put a fraud alert on all our accounts. I told them my husband had been making unauthorized transfers and I needed to protect our assets. They immediately froze his debit card and flagged any future attempts to access the accounts. By 11 p.m. that night, David couldn't buy a pack of gum without my permission. And then I did something that even I wasn't sure I had the guts to do. I called Michael. "Danielle?" Michael sounded surprised to hear from me. "Is everything okay?" "No, Michael. Everything is not okay. David gave you $12,000 today without discussing it with me first. I need to know what's really going on." Silence. Long, uncomfortable silence. "Michael." "Danielle, this is between David and me." "No, it's between David, you, and MY Money. So start talking." Another pause. "It's complicated." "Uncomplicated." That's when Michael told me something that made me realize the betrayal was so much deeper than I'd imagined. "Danielle, David didn't tell you about the other transfers?" "Other transfers? What other transfers?" "The ones from last month. And the month before." "Danielle, David's been helping me for months. I thought you knew." The room started spinning. I pulled up our bank statements on my phone, going back further than I had before. And there they were. Smaller amounts. $2,000 in January. $3,500 in February. Always labeled as transfers with vague descriptions. "How much, Michael?" "In total, how much has he given you?" "Including today, about $23,000. $23,000. Nearly our entire emergency fund. Gone." without my knowledge. But what Michael told me next made me realize this wasn't just about money. It was about a web of lies that went back to the beginning of our marriage. Danielle, there's something else you need to know about why I needed the money. And about David's involvement in my problems. Michael, what are you talking about? David never told you about the lawsuit, did he? Lawsuit? What lawsuit? 3 years ago, I made a mistake on a case. A big mistake. My client lost millions, and they sued me for malpractice. The case has been dragging through the courts, and my insurance, it's not going to cover everything. My mind was racing. 3 years ago. That was right around the time David started being weird about money. More controlling about our budget. Less willing to discuss big purchases. How much are we talking about, Michael? The settlement? $200,000. $200,000. But here's the thing, Danielle. The mistake I made, it wasn't entirely my fault. David was supposed to help me with some research on the case. He was doing freelance paralegal work for my firm at the time, remember? The research he provided was incomplete. That's what led to my error. Everything went silent. I could hear my own heartbeat. Are you telling me that David is partially responsible for your malpractice lawsuit? The opposing counsel thinks so. If this goes to trial, they're going to subpoena David. They're going to argue that my firm was negligent in using unqualified contract workers for critical case research. I felt like I was going to be sick. So the money he's been giving you. It's not just helping me, Danielle. It's protecting himself. If I can settle this case quietly, David's involvement never comes to light. If I can't, Michael trailed off. If you can't, then David gets dragged into a malpractice lawsuit that could destroy his reputation and make him liable for damages. Exactly. I hung up the phone and just sat there in the dark. Everything made sense now. David's secretiveness about money. His reluctance to look for better jobs. His insistence on keeping our profile low, never taking on debt, always having cash reserves. He'd been living in fear for 3 years. Fear that his mistake would come back to destroy our life. And instead of telling me his wife, his partner, the person who's supposed to face life's challenges with him, he'd been secretly funneling our money to cover it up. But here's what made me absolutely furious. He'd been stealing from our future to pay for his past, and he never gave me the choice to face it together. Remember that $15,000 I'd been saving to surprise him with? The money for his dream business? Now I realized why he'd been so resistant to the idea of entrepreneurship. How could he start his own business knowing he might get dragged into a lawsuit that could destroy everything? I was angry at the betrayal. I was hurt by the lies. But what broke my heart was the realization that my husband had been carrying this burden alone for years, too ashamed or too proud to let me help him carry it. But my sympathy only went so far. Because what he'd done wasn't just dishonest, it was financially devastating. And I was about to find out it was even worse than I thought. David came downstairs the next morning already dressed for work, clearly planning to avoid any continuation of our fight. He went to grab his wallet and keys, same routine as always. "Your card's been declined," I said without looking up from my coffee. "What?" I said your card's been declined. I canceled it last night. He stared at me like I'd lost my mind. Danielle, what are you talking about? I removed your access to all our accounts. Every single one. You can't do that. I just did. David's face went through about 5 different expressions before settling on rage. This is insane. You can't cut me off from our money. Our money? You mean the money you've been secretly giving to your brother for months without telling me? That money. Danielle, you're being ridiculous. Change the passwords back right now. No. 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 Not until we have a real conversation about what's been happening. Not until you tell me the truth about everything. And not until we figure out how we're going to handle this situation together, like married people are supposed to do. That's when David said something that made me realize how deep this betrayal really went. Fine. I'll just use the emergency credit card. Emergency credit card. The one we'd agreed to never touch unless someone was literally dying. I canceled that too. His face went white. All of them, David. Every card, every account, every way you have of accessing money without my knowledge. You want to make financial decisions without me? You can do it with your own money. What happened next was not what I expected. David didn't yell. He didn't storm out. He didn't threaten me or demand I fix it. Instead, he sat down at our kitchen table and started crying. Not angry tears. Not frustrated tears. Defeated, exhausted, overwhelmed tears. I never wanted this, he said quietly. I never wanted to lie to you. Then why did you? Because I was scared. Because I made a mistake that's been haunting us for 3 years, and I didn't know how to fix it without destroying everything. So instead you decided to just drain our savings account behind my back? I thought I could handle it. I thought if I could just help Michael settle the case quietly, it would all go away and you'd never have to know. Never have to know that my husband has been living a lie for 3 years? David looked up at me with red, puffy eyes. Danielle, if this lawsuit goes to trial, we could lose everything. Our house, our savings, our future. They could come after me for hundreds of thousands in damages. So you thought the solution was to give Michael our money in secret until, what? Until we had nothing left. Until the problem went away. Problems like this don't just go away, David. I know, he shouted, slamming his hand on the table. I know that. But I didn't know what else to do. That's when I realized something that changed everything about how I saw the situation. My husband wasn't just a liar who'd betrayed my trust. He was a scared man who'd been drowning in shame and anxiety for years, making increasingly desperate decisions to try to save us from a disaster he'd helped create. But that didn't make what he'd done okay. David, I said, sitting down across from him. I need you to understand something. This isn't just about the money you gave Michael. This is about the fact that you've been lying to me for months. Maybe years. I was trying to protect you. You were trying to protect yourself. There's a difference. He didn't argue with that. Here's what's going to happen, I continued. You're going to call in sick to work today. We're going to sit at this table, and you're going to tell me everything. Every detail about this lawsuit, every dollar you've given Michael, every lie you've told me, every secret you've been keeping. Everything. Danielle. I'm not done. After you tell me everything, we're going to call Michael together and get the full story from him. Then we're going to call a lawyer, our own lawyer, not Michael, and find out exactly what our exposure is and what our options are. And then we're going to decide whether this marriage is worth saving. I watched my husband's face crumble. Danielle, please. I know I messed up, but... David, you didn't just mess up. You made a conscious decision to handle a major crisis without your wife. You chose to protect Michael's reputation over our financial security. You chose secrecy over partnership. You chose to drain our accounts rather than trust me with the truth. I was scared you'd leave me. So instead you gave me reasons to leave you? The irony wasn't lost on either of us. What happened over the next 6 hours changed everything I thought I knew about my husband and our marriage. David told me everything. And I mean everything. The paralegal work he'd been doing for Michael's firm wasn't just occasional research. He'd been essentially working as an unqualified legal assistant, helping prepare cases he had no business touching. The work paid well, much better than his construction job, but it was completely outside his expertise. The case where he'd made the mistake? David had been asked to research similar lawsuits and precedents. He'd missed several key cases that would have changed Michael's entire strategy. When Michael relied on David's incomplete research and lost the case, the client sued for malpractice. But here's the kicker: David hadn't just made a mistake. He'd been overwhelmed by the complexity of the work, and instead of admitting he was in over his head, he'd submitted research he knew was incomplete, hoping it would be enough. I was embarrassed, he admitted. Michael had talked me up to his partners as this brilliant researcher, and I didn't want to admit I couldn't handle the work. So his pride had contributed to a mistake that was now threatening to cost us everything. But wait, it gets worse. Danielle, there's something else. I thought I'd heard everything, but apparently we weren't done. The money I've been giving Michael, it's not just for the settlement. What do you mean? David looked like he was going to be sick. Michael's been blackmailing me. I'm sorry, what? Not exactly blackmailing, but pressuring me. He says if I don't help him settle this case, he's going to tell his partners and the opposing counsel that I was working outside my qualifications, that I essentially committed fraud by representing myself as a qualified paralegal. Is that true? Technically, yes. I never claimed to be licensed, but I also never corrected people when they assumed I had proper training. So my husband had been paying his brother to keep quiet about his own professional misconduct. David, that is blackmail. He's not asking for money to keep quiet. He's asking for money to make the problem go away for both of us, by bankrupting us in the process. I didn't know what else to do. That phrase again. The motto of every bad decision he'd made for 3 years. Get out. What? I said get out. I need you to leave. Right now. Danielle, please. David, I can't even look at you right now. You've been lying to me, stealing from me, and getting blackmailed by your own brother for 3 years. I need time to think. Where am I supposed to go? I don't care. Call Michael. I'm sure he has plenty of room in that big house our money helped save. That was cruel, but I was past caring. Danielle, if I leave now. If you don't leave now, I'm calling a lawyer. Not to help us with Michael's lawsuit, but to start divorce proceedings. David looked at me like I'd slapped him. You don't mean that. Try me. 20 minutes later, I watched my husband of 6 years pack a bag and walk out our front door. And for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. But that feeling didn't last long, because what I discovered over the next few days made everything so much worse. With David out of the house, I did something I'd never done before. I investigated my own husband. I went through every bank statement, every credit card bill, every financial record we had. I called our accountant. I pulled our credit reports. I even hired a private investigator to look into Michael's lawsuit and David's involvement. What I found was devastating. The $23,000 David had given Michael? That was just the beginning. Over the past 3 years, David had been systematically draining our accounts in ways I'd never noticed. Mysterious business expenses that were actually payments to lawyers. Home improvement purchases that never happened. Investment transfers that went straight to accounts controlled by Michael. In total, David had diverted over $60,000 of our money to deal with this lawsuit. $60,000. Our entire emergency fund, most of our house renovation savings, and money from accounts I didn't even know he had access to. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what the private investigator found out about the lawsuit itself. Michael's malpractice case wasn't some unavoidable professional mistake. It was the result of systematic corner-cutting and negligence by his entire firm. The case where David had done incomplete research? It was one of 12 similar cases where Michael's firm had used unqualified contract workers to cut costs. The opposing counsel wasn't just going after Michael, they were building a case for a pattern of professional misconduct that could shut down the entire firm. David wasn't just protecting himself from getting dragged into one lawsuit. He was part of a much bigger scandal that could result in criminal charges for fraud. And Michael had been lying to both of us about the scope of the problem. The $200,000 settlement Michael mentioned? That was just for one case. The total exposure for the firm, and by extension, David, was potentially over $1 million. Michael hadn't been asking David for help out of brotherly desperation. He'd been systematically extracting money from us to fund his legal defense, while letting David believe he was just helping with a temporary problem. My husband hadn't just been betraying me. He'd been getting played by his own brother. I called Michael and told him I wanted to meet. Just the two of us. We met at a coffee shop downtown, and I brought every piece of evidence I'd gathered. Michael, I said, sliding a folder across the table. We need to talk. Danielle, look, I know you're upset about the money, but... Shut up and open the folder. He looked surprised by my tone, but he opened it. Inside was a complete dossier on his malpractice case, his firm's legal troubles, and the real scope of his financial problems. His face went pale as he read. Where did you get this? I hired someone to find out what my husband has really been paying for. Michael closed the folder and looked at me with something that might have been respect. Danielle, you don't understand. If this information gets out, your firm gets shut down, you lose your license, and David gets charged as an accessory to fraud. I understand perfectly. Then you know why I needed the money. I know why you wanted the money. I also know you've been lying to David about how much trouble he's really in. Michael leaned back in his chair. What do you want? I want you to stop taking money from my husband. I want you to handle your own legal problems with your own resources. And I want you to tell David the truth about what he's really facing. And if I don't? Then I go to the State Bar Association with everything I've found, and I make sure everyone knows exactly how your firm has been operating. It wasn't really a threat. I had no intention of destroying David's life to get revenge on Michael. But Michael didn't know that. Danielle, if I can't settle these cases, then you should have thought of that before you decided to use unqualified contractors and then cover it up with money stolen from your brother's marriage. Michael stared at me for a long moment. He really doesn't know, does he? How much trouble he's in. Why don't you tell him? Because he'd run. He'd disappear, change his name, start over somewhere else. And then I'd be left holding the bag for everything. So instead, you've been slowly draining his bank account to fund your defense. I've been trying to protect both of us. You've been protecting yourself and letting David think he was helping with a temporary problem. Michael rubbed his face with his hands. What do you want me to do, Danielle? I want you to be a brother instead of a leech. That night, David called me. Danielle, we need to talk. I'm listening. Michael told me about your meeting. Good. Then you know the real scope of what we're dealing with. Danielle, I'm so sorry. I had no idea how bad it really was. David, that's the problem. You've been making decisions based on incomplete information for 3 years, just like you did with Michael's research. Silence on the other end of the line. I know you're right, he said finally. I've been an idiot. You've been scared. There's a difference. Is there? Because I've been so scared of losing everything that I've been making decisions that are guaranteed to lose everything. That was the first moment of real insight I'd heard from my husband in months. David, can you come home? We need to talk about what we're going to do. Are you going to give me access to our accounts again? Not yet, but we need to figure out how to handle this situation together. Together. That's what married people do, David. They face problems together. When David came home that night, we stayed up until 3 a.m. making a plan. First, we were going to stop giving Michael money. Period. He was a lawyer. He could figure out how to fund his own defense. Second, we were going to hire our own attorney to find out exactly what David's liability was and what our options were. Third, David was going to come clean with his current employer about the situation. Better they hear it from him than discover it when he gets subpoenaed. Fourth, we were going to liquidate some investments to pay for legal representation, and David was going to get a second job to start rebuilding our savings. And finally, we were going to start couples counseling to figure out how to rebuild trust in our marriage. Danielle, David said as we finally headed to bed. There's something else I need to tell you. I was exhausted, but I steeled myself for another revelation. What now? The business you wanted to help me start? I knew you were saving money for it. My blood went cold. What do you mean you knew? I saw the statements from your freelance account. I figured out what you were doing. And you said nothing? I was ashamed. Here you were, secretly saving money to help me achieve my dreams, and I was secretly stealing money to cover up my mistakes. I stared at my husband in the dim light of our bedroom. David, why didn't you tell me? Because it made everything worse. It made me realize what a coward I've been and what an amazing wife I was destroying with my lies. That was 6 months ago. Today, I can tell you that David and I are still married, but it's a completely different marriage than the one we had before. The lawsuit is still ongoing, but our lawyer managed to negotiate David's involvement down to a deposition and a small financial penalty. It turns out that when you're honest about mistakes and cooperate fully with investigators, they're much more interested in the people who tried to cover things up than the people who got in over their heads. Michael's firm was ultimately shut down, and he lost his license. The criminal charges were dropped in exchange for cooperation and restitution, but his legal career is over. David did get that second job, and we've been slowly rebuilding our savings. More importantly, we've been rebuilding our trust. I still control our finances. David gets a monthly allowance for personal expenses, and any purchase over $50 has to be discussed in advance. It sounds controlling, and maybe it is, but it's what we both need right now. The couple's counseling has been brutal but necessary. We've had to confront not just David's lies, but my tendency to try to control everything and my fear of being vulnerable with my own secrets. Because yes, I had to admit that keeping my business surprise fund secret from David was also a form of dishonesty, even if it was well-intentioned. If there's anything I want you to take away from this story, it's this. Financial dishonesty in a marriage isn't just about money. It's about respect, partnership, and trust. When one partner starts making major financial decisions without the other, they're essentially saying their partner isn't capable of handling the truth or helping solve the problem. David thought he was protecting me by lying to me. In reality, he was protecting himself from having to face his mistakes and ask for help. I thought I was being generous by secretly saving money for his dreams. In reality, I was avoiding a conversation about what we both really wanted from our future. We were both keeping secrets, but only one of us was draining our joint accounts to cover it up. The current state. David's access to our accounts is still limited, but we've started talking about gradually restoring it as trust rebuilds. The couple's counselor says it could take years to fully recover, but we're both committed to the process. The money Michael took from us? Most of it is gone forever. But we've learned to see it as the price of learning who we could really trust and what our marriage was really made of. David never did start his carpentry business, but he's been taking evening classes in project management and hopes to eventually move into construction supervision. The dreams are still there, they're just taking a different shape. As for me, I've learned that being the responsible partner doesn't mean being the controlling partner. It means being honest about my own fears and mistakes and creating space for my partner to be honest about theirs. But there's one more thing you need to know. One final twist that happened just last month. Remember that private investigator I hired to look into Michael's case? She called me with some interesting news. It turns out Michael hadn't just been taking money from David. He'd been borrowing money from at least 3 other family members and friends, all while telling them they were the only ones helping him and swearing them to secrecy. The total amount he'd extracted from people who trusted him? over $400,000. But here's the really twisted part. Michael had been lying about the settlement amounts too. The case had actually been settled months ago for much less than he'd claimed. He'd been continuing to take money from people while the legal problems were already resolved. David's brother hadn't just been desperate and making bad decisions under pressure. He'd been running a systematic con game on his own family. When David found out, he didn't get angry. He got sad. I was so focused on protecting him that I never stopped to consider he might not be worth protecting, he told me. That's when I knew our marriage was going to survive this. Because David had finally learned to see clearly, even when the truth was painful. Today, David and I are building something new. Not the marriage we had before. That one was built on assumptions that turned out to be false, but a partnership based on radical honesty and shared decision-making. It's harder than the old way. It's more uncomfortable. There are conversations we have to have now that we used to avoid. But it's real in a way our relationship never was before. The money will come back. Trust is harder to rebuild, but we're doing the work. And Michael? He's not part of our lives anymore. Family loyalty has limits, and we finally learned where ours are. Sometimes the best thing you can do for your marriage is to shut down everything, reset the rules, and start over. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable the person you love most. I took away my husband's access to our money because I had to save our future from his past. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, and the best decision I ever made. Because now, when David tells me he loves me, I believe him. And when I tell him I trust him, we both know exactly what that trust is worth and what it costs to rebuild. That's a kind of intimacy we never had before, and it's worth more than any amount of money Michael could have taken from us. The betrayal nearly destroyed us. But learning to face the truth together is what finally made us unbreakable. If you're facing financial dishonesty in your own relationship, know that it's never just about the money. It's about respect, communication, and the kind of partnership you want to build together. Trust can be rebuilt, but only if both partners are willing to do the difficult work of complete honesty. And sometimes, the most loving thing you can do is set boundaries that force that honesty to happen, even if it means temporarily shutting down everything to save what really matters.